blind man cross the road, trying to make the other side, baby. Ever seen a young girl growing old, trying to make herself a bride? So what becomes of you, my love?
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Pray that he's still out there, somewhere.
Hi and welcome. Thank you for joining us here, Eating While Honey and Locusts. Today, our presentation is on Masonic Schism. And I can hear that I've got an echo. Hopefully that's gone now. That's good. Okay. It has not, and I'm not sure what is going on here. Okay. Bear with me. Just hold on. Hi. Okay, sorry about that. Hopefully you can hear me now. Okay, it's an echo on my side. Okay, I'm just carry on with it because it looks like it's an echo on my side. I do apologize for that. So, my team, if you can just let me know that it is one sound, I'll continue speaking. Right. Okay, so look, welcome to today's podcast. Today we're studying the Masonic Schism, which Time Before Our Age, Part 3. And with us, that will be having Jon H taking us through the points, and then CEPHER Publishing and Gary Wayne, Six Conspiracy, with Stacey Hunt, part of the EWAL team, and with these excellent notes that Jon has given us. You're going to have to forgive me because I'm doing those several times as I'm speaking to you. There was some housekeeping I wanted to say to you, and then when I silence myself and bring the team on so that they can speak. And I probably won't be able to contribute much after that. So I do apologize for the way that the started. But I want to welcome all of you that are joining in the chat as well. So, as you know, we are meeting in Portugal for Pesach, and that is going to be the 11th to the 21st of April. The development that's happened today is that we will be having a gathering where people will be meeting in Florida. At this stage, it's planned to go ahead for the actual Pesach day, which is from the 11th to the 13th in Florida, Lakeside. But I was just speaking with Stephen, and also a consideration for second Pesach. So it could be one of these 2 days. So I will come back to you. But if you start to email in, we can see the interest there and take it from there. It would be wonderful to actually do that with a second consideration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our panel and then hand over to Stacey. If you can host this, And John, if I will do the slides for you in the background. Once again, sorry. So I'd like to welcome to this panel now John Hammond, Stacey Hubbard,
Hello.
Gary Wayne, Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and Dr. Stephen Pigeon, CEPHER Publishing. Welcome to you all. So sorry if you're being affected by the sound that I'm having here. But let's take it away with the program.
Okay. Thanks, Jess. Stacey? Okay.
Yes, you're good.
Good. Okay, folks. Welcome tonight. It's a pleasure to be back with Gary, Stephen, Stacey, and Jess. Tonight we're going to go through the Schism of Freemasonry, a topic I knew nothing about before I read Gary's book. I didn't know it existed. It's like he talks in, in the pews in church or anywhere else in my whole upbringing. So I'm pleased to go through this today. One is, we're all called to be watchmen, and I was brought to Ezekiel 32 last night, which is an echo of the sixth seal. If anybody wants to look at that, just as a heads up, just a little prick in the spirit there. Anyway, let's move on. So Jess, if you want to bring the slides up, or somebody, that'd be great. We're going to spin through a number of slides to start off with. They're more going to be flip card type slides that we just, let's look at the world, and then we're going to go into the deep study. And the deep study being, why did it begin? Who were the starters of this? How can we identify them? How did the lost knowledge come through the flood? Why do Masons now look at things like the Temple of Solomon and various other things as part of that they're taking ownership of that, and even Noah? There's all sorts of things coming up, right? So we'll be going through that. Now, Stacey, do you have the slides, Stacey, or is it Jess?
Yeah, it's Jess. Jess has it. She's, having some technical difficulties, but I'm sure Doc could come up with something to talk us through here. He's never had a loss for words, huh, Doc?
Yeah.
Doc's looking at you right now.
Yeah. The technical difficulties are an issue, of course. I've been running into myself lately. But, John, you've raised a very interesting issue concerning the sixth seal and concerning Ezekiel 32 and your inspiration on that. I've been finding that Ezekiel is really quite a revelatory at this particular period of time. Fortunately, I've had the chance to go through and reread Ezekiel in order, because it's Adamic in the text, and I placed it in order, and I've read through it in order. And when I first read through it in order, I thought, well, this is kind of boring now, because Ezekiel, of course, opens up with that spectacular vision of Ezekiel and the chariots and all this. Very exciting opening. But when you put it in order, all of a sudden you find that the flow of the prophecy is much closer to Amos than it is to anything else. Amos is very much a discussion of, woe to you, Damascus, woe to you, Gaza, woe to you, this, what, it's very specific. Boom, 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 boom. And you have a very kind of similar order in Ezekiel. And particularly how the book ends is really illustrative of what I think are end times prophecies, which I think are right now, I really think the end times prophecies are completely misunderstood in the modern world. That's what I believe. I think there's been so much pop eschatology from Hal Lindsey's late great Planet Earth to the Left Behind series and so on, which is where, people were really, willing to hungrily, eat up all of the Left Behind series. I think there were 12 books in that series without so much as cracking the cover on the book of Revelation. So I don't know. I mean, people are hungry for everything except the truth. But when you look at what's being said in Yechezkel and Ezekiel, there is so much forecasting into modernity, and what is here is something unexpected, and I think it's going to be unexpected for the whole world. The world is going to be shocked at what actually comes upon the earth, I think. And I think also when we talk about this, and I don't want to get too far into this because I know you have a slide presentation, but when I look at it now, I keep thinking that there is a snare that is being set in America. It's a snare. It's a trap. You know, there's cheese at the end of the mousetrap right there. The big piece of cheese that's being set right there. And the snare that's here is, again, I don't want to be one who's out here saying I've got all the information. But we know in 1 month, right? Today's the 25th. We've had 1 month and 4 days since the inauguration of Trump. And the world is completely upside down.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to what it was on January 20th, the world is completely upside down. And the changes in dynamics are huge. And they're going to be huge for Britain as well. And I wanted to say this, John, because, you know, you're such a great scholar in the work you do in Britain. And the work that Jesse does, you know, in terms of building the community of faith in really what is becoming an Islamic country. And that's really hard to deny. You know, when I saw that stadium in Birmingham completely full, and it was being celebrated as a mosque, and it was completely full, including the field. Yeah. You know, when was the last time you saw the Believers in Messiah gathering like that? In Britain, it's relics of great churches, barely attended, with few spokesmen anywhere. And so this is a very sad day. And I think when we look at this, even when we see what's happening now with the relationship between the United States and the UK and the United States and Europe, this is a relationship that is just collapsing as we speak. It hasn't collapsed in my heart. I just want to say that to you. It has not collapsed in my heart. My love for the UK, really for the British Isles, you know, because, you know, I'm a big fan of Ireland too, you know. And I haven't been to the Isle of Man yet, but I need to go there. But, you know, when you talk about these end times prophecies, I think that there is a surprise coming for the world, because the average American, which is the average American believer now, I would say, is really a Noahide believer, and not a classic Protestant, but rather a Noahide believer. They believe in the supremacy of Israel. They believe in the supremacy of the Temple Mount, and these kinds of things. And as a consequence, we have an apostasy here in America that is huge. And even though you see the bait in front of the temple is, what was the old Salvation Army song? You know, Christian soldiers, you know, marching on.
Onward Christian soldiers. Yeah.
Onward Christian soldiers. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's bait. That's bait. And the snare is being laid. And I think we're going to see the trap spring shut here very, very soon. And so for the believer, when we read Ezekiel, when we read Revelation, we look at any of these prophecies. And of course, you know, that's not our discussion today. Our discussion today is history, not prophecy.
I started off, sorry.
I think it's all working now, by the way.
Jess,
yeah,
Jesse. Are the slides working? Are you able to?
Yeah, the slides are working.
Cool.
So
finish and then we'll.
But did you have to reboot, or what happened?
I don't know why it was coming up double, but Drew's in a meeting with his CEO, but I had to call him and get him to video this and show him what was going on, and he managed to sort it out. So it's good now. I think this computer is like yours. It's on its last legs, Stephen. And that's what the issue is. So it's playing up.
We're all feeling old here now. Move on.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Let me get out of the way. Let's go back to where we were.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Doc.
Thank you, Dr. B. Okay. So this presentation is for teaching educational purposes only, not for profit, not for resale. All articles are clearly referenced. Okay. Okay, we've got the Genesis 6 conspiracy and the CEPHER, and we've got the Eating While Alien Locust website and affiliate links. Okay, that's the main sources for today's presentation. Okay, the Schism of Freemasonry, sacred knowledge. Let's move through. Just next slide. So I think this is where I want to begin, really, just to have a quick flip through a few slides here on control mechanisms. So in Matthew 4:8-9, the devil said, and again, the devil took him up to the exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, and said to them, all these things I'll give you if you'll fall down and worship me. So he's saying there then, who owns this world at the moment? It's Satan, right? So don't be shocked at the next slides. Obviously you won't be, you've seen them, but let's go through. Just next slide, please. So this is pyramid of world power. This is just a Google and a download. All seeing eye at the top. World monarch, Crown Council of 13, Committee of 300, think tanks, central banks, corporations, governments, religions, media, blah, blah, blah. All right, this shouldn't be new to anybody. It's just a thing. Next slide, Jess. Well-controlled media. Who do we listen to? Well, if you actually look, it's quite shocking. Got the Bilderberg meetings, the Council of Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Commission, who, between all the heads, control all the media. So when you think you've got diversity and choice, you've actually got three choices, which are probably all linked together anyway. Okay.
That's just horrible. That's just horrible.
Well, what can I say? So next slide, Jess. Purchasing. When you think you're buying choice, you're buying this chocolate bar, that chocolate bar, or I'm going to buy this rice pudding or this porridge or whatever it's going to be you're eating, you think you've got choice. But in the end, 10 companies rule the world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when you're buying things, look, that's what you have. Next. Who owns everything? The world financial markets. Again, you can't see all these names here, but bang in the middle, you've got the usual Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. Those three corporations own everything. Okay. Next slide. World Economic Forum 2018 blueprint. This is before we had the smart cities in the UK, right? Going to Oxford and Cambridge and stuff being 15-minute cities, whatever it is. You can see this is the one world control of digitization, which we see massive acceleration through Musk at the minute and Trump and various other things in the UK as well, right? So you've got healthcare, financial services, food and sustainability, travel mobility, humanitarian response, e-commerce, social platforms, e-government, telecommunications, smart cities, all linked through digital identity. So you can see that there's going to be a digital identity for people, things, entities, and devices, unique. And that's what we're heading to. That's 2018.
However,
Go.
Of course, I want to drop this on you. You know what you don't see listed on there? Music. They completely avoided music.
The arts. Yes.
Coming from a
Interesting, isn't it?
musician.
The arts.
Moving on.
Okay, next.
Symbols. Signs and symbols rule the world, not words or laws. Attribution to Confucius. It's invalid attribution, but it's an attribution, right? So let's spin through these quickly. Hidden eye in Psalm 35:19. Let not them that are my enemies wrongfully rejoice over me, neither let them wink the eye that hate me without a cause. So there's eye signs, celebrities and people. Next slide. Extended tongue, Isaiah 57:4. Again, against whom do you sport yourselves? Against whom make ye a wide mouth and draw out the tongue? Are you not children of transgression, a seed of falsehood?
Bingo.
So there you go. Some popular people there, right?
Wait, go back to that slide. Go back. What's this quote from Jim Carrey over Jimmy Fallon?
Like you don't know what it is, he said. You don't know Jimmy Fallon doesn't know. David Letterman doesn't know. All the comics and show business don't know what this is. Come on, Jimmy, seriously, time's up. Carr went on to say he was sick and tired of the secrets and lies and declared that this sign was the secret symbol of the Illuminati. Okay. So
Okay, there you go.
Whistleblower. The 666 sign, Revelation 13:18. Here is wisdom. Let he that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is a number of a man, and his number is 666 KJV, and it's 6 sigma in the CEPHER in the original Greek. Now, obviously, 666 has a kind of a magical attribute to it. It's been hijacked and spiritualized even Trump Towers at 666 Fifth Avenue. So it's got something about it, right? So it's been used rightly or wrongly. And there you go.
Yeah, well, one thing about 666, John, is that it is the number of man, right? It's the number of man because 7 is the number of 6 is the number of man. So as a consequence, people who go 666 in triplicate, they're just flesh. There's no spirit involved. There's no
carbon,
ruach.
right?
Flesh,
Exactly.
carnality to the max.
Yeah, and added to the polytheist understanding and use of 3 and 6, it's humankind trying to become God.
There
you go.
I like that one. Yeah, very good. Yeah.
And these eyes here, each one means something. If it's the left eye, that's the feminine energy for the moon god. If it's the right eye, it's the masculine energy for the sun god. So they're telling you which one they're serving.
Really?
Mhm.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the
Okay.
eyes of Horus.
Okay.
I knew it was eyes of Horus, but not left and right, feminine, male. That's new. Yeah.
Yeah, always keep the duality in mind. It's a key element of polytheism, which is why the mother goddess coming back is going to be a key part of the end time religion.
Okay.
Mm.
This one
Very good.
confused me a little bit. Again, it's a hijack thing, I think, but I don't know if this has come from Babylonian Talmudism or if it's come from, ancient Judaism, etc. But you see on the top left the Hebraic priests doing the that sort of Spock sign, but with the pyramid in the middle.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you
Rabbi.
what that sign is.
Go on.
Let me tell you what that sign is. Okay,
Go on, tell me.
that sign is Leonard Nimoy used half of this on Star Trek.
Yeah.
Right. He would put up his right hand and say, be fruitful and multiply. No, that wasn't it. I forget what it was. Live long and prosper or something, whatever it was. But at any rate, it was half the blessing. And so what the priests are doing in this Hebraic scene is they're doing a combination of what you would call Aramaic block script and Paleo-Hebrew, in that the triangle that they're forming with the hand is the Dalet. And by putting the two fingers together on the outside, they're creating the Sheen. So it's Sheen Dalet, which is representative of Shaddai. So it's just Shaddai. That's what it is. That's what that sign is.
Yeah, for the Most High. Very good. Yeah, nice. Okay, so anyway, it's been obviously, whether it be the all-seeing eye pyramid on the right or the blessing on the left. I suppose on the right they haven't got the fingers like Leonard Nimoy, so it's not. There's no shins there, just the Dalet. So it's a different sign, really. So the
sign that is exclusively the pyramid sign is a different story. Now, this is something that's very interesting. You've got Angela Merkel making the sign down here. You also have so Hitler's got a little bit of that hand configuration, but if you go and you'll see there's a video recently of Donald Trump Jr. standing in front of the line, and he walks out and he makes a point of making this downward triangle like Angela Merkel's symbol. He makes it a point of holding that out in front of him until his wife takes his hands away. Says that's enough of that. You've shown that enough. But the downward Dalet. So remember that there's in the Star of David there are two Paleo Dalets. One is upright and one is downward, and you put them together, they form the hexagram. And the Dalet that points upward is saying as above, and the Dalet pointing downward, so below. So the hexagram really means as above, so below. They say it's the Star of David because if you were to spell David in the Paleo Hebrew, it would be Dalet, Vav, Dalet, diamond, and then kind of a Y for the Vav, and then another Dalet. But to merge the two together, one up and one down, is to really say as above, so below. And where is the Vav that should be in the middle of that? There should be a Vav right in the middle of that, because the Vav is symbolic of what? The nail, which is symbolic of Mashiach, and the Star of David that is used by Israel is conspicuously missing the mark of Mashiach. It's missing the mark of the nail. It's missing it. And of course, that's the case with the theology. So when you see the idea of somebody pointing a triangle up, as you see over here with, I don't know if that's Dave Letterman on the far right up there, but you can see some of the people in the top group of 4. Well, actually, the top group of 8, they're all making a triangle facing upward, right? And so this upward forming triangle, I think, is actually symbolic of the pyramid with the all-seeing eye at the top of it. But the guys with the pyramid facing downward, which includes Angela Merkel and whoever it is to her right, I don't know who that is. But when you see that pointing down, that is a different symbol. That is a symbol. And this was something that was pointed out by a friend of mine whose name will go unmentioned, but who was at one time a 32nd degree Mason, and before he left Masonry and repented. And he said that hand symbol of the dalet pointing downward does not exist in Freemasonry. It is the hand symbol of something else. Now, you had Jim Carrey said sticking the tongue out was the mark of the Illuminati. Well, the Illuminati, of course, was a satanic organization formed by Adam Weishaupt in 1776 that overcame the Scottish Rite Presbyterian Church and the Scottish Rite Masonry. And then that was advanced greatly into Luciferianism under Albert Pike. But when you talk about this idea of the dalet downward, we're not really sure of what that is marking. But I suspect that it is a Luciferian cabal. It's not Freemasonry. It's a Luciferian cabal. And remember that you have to keep in mind that when you look at the Luciferianism, there's a question as to whether or not the Jesuit order is Luciferian in its nature. There's reason to believe that it is. And it's also possible to believe that the downward facing dalet is a symbol of the Luciferian Jesuit order. In other words, the Black Pope, so on and so forth, being under its tutelage. And when you go back to that pyramid that you showed, John, you showed the 13 families followed by the committee of 300 in that pyramid. You know, those 13 families have been in control of the Western Roman Empire since before the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Whether you're talking the Orsinis or you're talking the Farneses or you're talking the Medici or whoever you're talking about, those 13 families continue to control the papacy, and they continue to control Europe to some great degree. No one wants to admit that they have control in the United States, but Trump, in his last term as president, appointed 4 Catholics to the U.S. Supreme Court to create an order of 7 Catholics and 2 Jews on the Supreme Court of the United States. That's its current condition, by the way.
Yeah. Okay, gosh. Thank you. Okay, Jess. So, the next few slides are about, are they messaging and telling us what they intend to do? Is any of this planned, or is it just paranoia? So, on here, Twin Towers stuff. Now, the top right, you've got the Supertramp album, which might be coincidence that 9/11's over it. Bottom left, you've got Bart Simpson. Might be coincidence that 9/11 is in the $sign there. In the middle, you've got like a plane into a building. Bottom right, you've got Iron Man with some plane going into into more buildings there. So into the Pentagon, etc. So is this coincidence? Could well be, but I don't know.
Well, the younger generation, because when Dallas saw this, he said, you've got to anticipate the other side of it. And so we're saying that there could be something hidden here. Because if you look at the first one, Sesame Street, that's also a take on King Kong and Godzilla. So we're just saying, okay, this is the Twin Towers. Maybe it's saying something else. John's version of this Supertramp album, you can't really see it clearly on here, and it's gone reversed on the other side, but it's actually through a cockpit window. And these are all, what you're seeing as a city is made up of different kitchen utensils like salt and pepper shakers, different boxes, pans, and so on. But again, there's something that depicts the Twin Towers. And then, of course, for all generations, especially those into comics and so on, the Pentagon in the Twin Towers are always, or things that look like the Twin Towers, are always depicted. So we're not just saying so that we're going to be called silly conspiracy theorists. We do see the other side of this, but we're saying what is hidden in plain sight as well. So for the younger people that are joining in, I do want to say that so you understand it from that point of view also.
Okay, so next, again, this could be coincidence, but if you look at this, all the bills I'm going to show in the next 2 slides are folded exactly the same way. Okay, that we're not trying to do origami in 500 different manners here, but got the Oklahoma Federal Building, 1995, on the old $20 bill, folded up in that sort of triangular fashion. Got the Twin Towers on the $20 bill there in the middle, On the right, you've got the Pentagon on the $20 bill. Now, that could be coincidence. They folded it that way, and it shows you different things. It may say, well, actually, it's not. It's just buildings. Who cares, right? But on the link at the bottom there, if you look at the YouTube there, you've got Jonathan Clegg, who is brilliant. He goes through this. And what you don't see here actually is on the next slide as well, is that the watermarks behind give you different visions of the same building. So on this one here, there's more. There's the on the left there, you can see the New York there with the folded in the same way. Now, first you think, well, what is that? Then on the right, you look at the watermarks, and the first watermark shows it being like flooded or destroyed, and the second shows the building being collapsed, okay, after the nuclear bomb. So those are the watermarks behind it with that scenario. If you also look at that view, if you look at the film The Day After Tomorrow, there's a scene where it looks down like, I don't know, Fifth Avenue or one of the avenues, and there's water coming down it, etc. It's a bit like that, okay? So, and on the right, the tsunami one has the same thing, right? If you go to the different scene, the watermarks behind it, you see flowing water coming down the building. I didn't expand on this one, but look at the links at the bottom and see what you think. So again, this could be coincidence, right? It might just be nothing, But next one is the World Economic Forum speech, 23rd of January 2025, quite recent. On this one, I have looked at the internet. I've looked to see, look at the federal stamp here, and the eagle's always pointing towards the olive branch. But if you look behind them, for some reason, just for this one speech, the eagle's facing towards the arrows to sort of hint possibly at war or something else, or it might be an accident, right? Who knows? But it's unusual.
Where Trump's concerned in this kind of stuff, they really haven't taken care of the seal of the presidency like they should. There was a point when, they had the podium out there during the pandemic, and the seal just, flat fell off the podium. Come on, really? There's absolutely no excuse for that happening, but it did. And so I'm not sure that they take care of this. In this particular case, for the eagle to be facing the arrows, however, is something different, because that is an intentional thing. This is not like, what do they call it? A mirror image?
Yeah.
It's not mirroring the image. This is a turning of the image. Because otherwise, if you look carefully at the circle on the right, John, and you could see that on the eagle's left talon is clutching the arrows. The eagle's right talon is clutching the olive branch. If you look at the image that's broadcast behind Trump, you still see the olive branch in the right talon of the eagle and the arrows in the left talon of the eagle, but the eagle's head has turned towards the arrows. It's not a mirror image.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, no, exactly. It isn't. And I grabbed off YouTube, links at the bottom, so it's not like some deep fake thing. Okay. Next. What is again? I'll be super quick, Gary. I'm almost on your part now. Sorry, this is all your part, but just. So, what is Freemasonry? So, I thought I'd have see what they say. Jess, if you do the next slide, that'd be great. So, I went to the Builder magazine, January 1916. And I said, I looked at the Q&A right at the beginning of it. I thought, well, that's great. Let's see what they say. So, the first question is, what is the meaning of the word free in Freemasonry? And the answer was, Freemasons in the olden time were free to go to and fro where the work called them. Instead of being bound by law to live and work in one town, as guild masons were, they're also free from any obligations of taxations and other restrictions. So Freemasons were free to go anywhere they wanted to without taxation. That's the meaning of the word free in Freemasons. The second question is a man a Mason who has taken only the entered apprentice degree, i.e. the first level of the 3 degrees? And then below it says, a man is not really a Mason qualified to work as such until he's received the 3rd degree. Okay, so you need to have all 3 degrees before he qualified as a Mason, okay, and to have initiated fully. Further down it says, as a quote, I believe that Freemasonry, or Masonry, from what I've read of it, has existed from time immemorial. So that's attesting to the fact that it's beyond memory. And at the bottom, to say that Freemasons were all at one time the Masons' trade is a gross error, because it is said that all the kings of Scotland and most of the noblemen were Freemasons. Okay, so that's from the Builder magazine. So that's them telling us, nothing else. If we go to the next slide, Jess, that'd be great. Cool. So then I thought I'd get a second witness. So there's a guy here on the chat forum, I've got the link at the bottom here, called Sean Bell. He's a Master Mason, a Knight Templar, 32nd degree, so he must know what he's talking about. So he says, I'll do a Mattithyahu Hall thing, but it doesn't matter about that. It says the 33rd degree doesn't have anything to do with Freemasonry. It's specific to the Scottish Rite. There are only 3 degrees in Freemasonry: the Entered Apprentice, Fellowcraft, and Master Mason. You don't get raised to the 33rd degree. It's an honorary degree that's conferred by the Scottish Rite. So the concept here is there are 3 degrees of Masonry, okay, and only 3, after which, rather like you get an honorary degree from university for doing goodwill or good work, right? You get an honorary degree afterwards. But the honorary degree can be based on position. So it could be a job, like we'll show you in a bit, like judges and things, etc. Or it could be because you've got certain, or it could be your present. For instance, you might get 32nd or 33rd degree, for instance, the honorary. Next slide. Another website I went to, which is, again, it's called marklandmason.com. It says, after further study, I discovered that the early Masons considered Noah as a Masonic patriarch of sorts. He is mentioned in passing in the Regis manuscript of 1425 to 50, and again in the Cook manuscript of 1450, which makes reference to the sons of Noah discovering 2 pillars after the flood, on which they'll inscribe the arts and sciences. And in the middle there, you can see the Masonic badge there with Noah's Ark and the rainbow and the triangle on it. Okay. Again, this is all knitting into Gary's work as a second echo. Go on, Stephen.
But John, they're ignoring the fact that Noah really built the ark out of cinder block. If people really knew this, then they'd know he was a Freemason and not just a carpenter.
Behave. So let's get to the next one, please. So this one's kind of key. There's a bit on this slide from left to right. On the left, you can see there's the first 3 steps. These are the Entered Apprentice, Fellowcraft, and Blue Lodge Master Mason. Okay. After which you get all the other grants above it. Now, actually, one thing as I get onto this, there's a turn of phrase in England, and you may have it in America, I don't know, and elsewhere, that says giving somebody the 3rd degree. And if you give somebody the 3rd degree, you're interrogating them, you're really chastising them, you're really going hard at them and giving and let it all go, basically. Now, I'm wondering if it's so endemic in the population over here that the 3rd degree is almost like the right. When you get your 3rd degree masonry, maybe one of those rights to enter that and become qualified as a 3rd degree is to undergo some kind of interrogation or qualification.
Sure. I mean, I would underline that the adepts are sworn to secrecy even under torture and death. And so if you're going to get information out of the adepts, this was the old tradition. I would expect those rules and things are still in position today, but maybe not to the same sort of fanaticism in the past, that you would have to do a special type of inquisition, so to speak, or interrogation and torture to try and elicit anything from them.
Wow, it's interesting. So yeah, so
it kind of originates with the fall of the Knights Templar.
Wow. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
So, the other second way to get
just
out,
back.
I was just going to say the other second way for them to get out is people that want to denounce and renounce Freemasonry, that have been in those higher levels and they want to get deliverance. They usually come and they're divulging some of the information, like those numbers. They don't write 1, 2, and 3, like first, second, and third. They write them with 1 and then another line and then another line, which is actually 111 degrees. But they don't tell you that, you know what I mean, until you get past that 3rd degree, and the honorary 111 is the next step all the way up.
Okay, got it. So hey, I want to bring a few things to our notice here. On the left, you got the menorah and the cross. Obviously, Solomon's Temple features in this, and I'm going to quiz Gary about this a bit later. On the right there, you've got the numbers of the degrees, and the 21st degree there. If you have it, you probably can't read it on this, but when you get the slides, you can. Is the you've got the Noachite or Prussian Knight. The 21st has got the gavel. It's all to do with law. So judges and barristers will get an honorary degree of the 21st. Okay. Now Stephen Bendon has done a very good. About a year ago, 2 years ago, he did this whole sort of debrief and going into the Noahide judges. Okay, which are Masonic. I did do a study on it, but I've lost all my slides for that somehow, disappeared. But the Noachite laws underneath You can see they've got the Noah's Ark there, etc. And what's more interesting for me is the fact that you got the law thing there, got Noahide laws, and at the bottom, if you look at their actual garment, and I got this from the Brick Masons, okay, which is the Scottish Rite apron of all yellow with gold moire for the 21st degree. You can see, you can click on it and see it. It's got what looks like a fallen angel, an angel with a key to the bottom of the split or something, and above it, it's got an arm with a sword. Now, when I've Googled this thing, well, who is this geezer? Why did they put an angel on this cape? Right, what's going on here? And they say it's the Egyptian figure of silence. Now, on the right, far right, you can see the Egyptian figure of silence. It doesn't have wings, has an ankh, not a key as such. So the ankh is a sort of a key, and then there's another statue. Neither of them have wings. So I'm wondering if this Noachite thing, the judges are tied together with the 21st degree, and the fact that you got like the angels at the bottom of the split is more of a timing thing, right? And a sword at the top. And then if you go to the right, okay, click on that link. This is the North American Scottish Rite, the patriarch for Noachite. It looks like a book cover for a sinister thing, right? But that's on the that's straight off the website, which is a Masonic website. And at the bottom it says the 21st degree teaches us to rule virtues of Masons. It's all about justice. So these guys are, formidable, and you never heard of them. Well, I hadn't. So,
well, if I can say something, John, because you're raising such a huge issue here, and I just want to kind of get to this. You remember I kind of talked before when Jesse was having the problems about a snare being set.
Yeah.
And the snare being set is this kind of overt push that says that Christianity is going to be protected in America. And on the backside, we see the rise of the Noahide system. And the Noahide system is coming very, very quickly and very completely. And it's from the top down. Christianity is kind of what is Christianity anymore, particularly in America? What is it? And the idea that Trump is going to protect the Christian faith, while, I mean, like, for instance, the fellow who just got ensconced as the head of the FBI said he is going to be looking at domestic crimes against Israel. There are 26 states in the United States right now that are considering legislation to require an oath to Israel. 26. And we can begin to see that this rise of this Noahide system is at the door. It's at the door. Of course, Stephen and Yana, have been kind of on top of this issue for a long time. For at least 10 years, I'm saying more like 15, they've been on top of this issue. But the fact that this Noahide system is coming is a system of, I'll just be brief about it because I want to get over to Gary. The Noahide system is one that is going to create two classes of citizens. You have the leadership, which is an elite group, Talmudic based, and everyone else who is deemed worthy of living will be considered a Noahide. That they come under the Seven Noahide Laws that have been called the moral center of the United States by every president since George H.W. Bush in 1991. And if you don't come under those, if you don't accept the status as Noahide under those 7 laws, then you're not worthy of life.
Yeah, no, exactly. Jess, go to the next slide, please. I'm not going to spend any time on the slide, but just this is for these slides are for information, right? So, top left, you got the 7 laws, but look at 1 and 3. 1 is not to worship idols. Now, Yahushua's an idol, right? According to them, is not is a false god for them. Number 3 is to establish courts of justice, and then the bottom right it says justice laws must administer the death penalty. It's a mandate for them. Okay, so then you have to go to Luke and say, well, think not what you'll say, because Luke 12:12 for the Holy Ghost or Ruach HaKodesh shall teach you the name in the same hour what you should say when you go to court, etc. So it's all of that. We're kind of looming, you hear about these guillotines in different places. You don't know if it's conspiracy or what, but ultimately you know, whatever's put in the Bible, in the scripture, will come to pass. So sometimes.
And it's interesting. I was reading this, last night in the book of Revelation too. It says that in those days, or maybe it's in Matthew, maybe it's in both. In those days, they will carry you into the synagogues to accuse you. And it doesn't say the ecclesia or the kehillah or the church. They will carry you into the synagogues to accuse you, which tells me, prophetically speaking here, that the average church in America is very soon is no longer going to be called a church, based after Circe the Kirka, but is going to be called the synagogue. And this could happen very, very quickly, that the churches are no longer churches, but synagogues, particularly in the states that are requiring an oath to Israel, that all of those churches are going to rename themselves as synagogues, and this is where you will stand accused.
So then you get a Zionist attitude, etc. But in Luke 12:11, it echoes it, Stephen, as well. It says, and when they bring you into the synagogues and the magistrates and powers, right? So obviously it's going to be, flip of a coin, who knows when the balance changes. But if you're saying that there's, 26 states already considering things, then, you got the balance there, haven't you?
Yeah, it's gonna move very quickly now, very quickly.
Okay, let's spin quickly. Almost there, Gary, almost there. 2 slides, right? Hidden in plain sight, the World Conference of the Masonic Fraternity here on the left. Again, the rulers look the same, but they're not. They've got different degrees, right? On the left, you've got 12. On the right, you've got 17. And the same here. If you look at the Strongs, if you look at the Grand Lodge of Ohio, bottom, the same logo, right? And it's got 12 and 17. 12, 17 in Strongs means creator, craftsman, or maker. There's giving you signs in plain sight all the time. Okay, do you get that? Yeah. Okay, so next. Hand signs, but we all know that. Right, next, Jess. In fact, there's 2 things, right? I've known somebody that's given me handshakes like that. I didn't know who he was until I grew up a lot. And Stephen, you've known people with handshakes as well. Funny handshakes, haven't you? Masonic type ones.
Oh, yeah. And not only handshakes, but hand symbols. I mean, I lost a case once in front of a Masonic judge and a Masonic lawyer who had no argument whatsoever. He had no law to back up his claim. And when he was losing, he stood up and he took his fist and he pounded his fist straight down into the table like this, not like hammer fist, but straight down into the table. And when he did, the judge immediately recognized him as a fellow Mason and immediately switched the decision and kicked us out of the courtroom.
Oof. Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. Next, Jess. That's terrible. But it shows, it's like the 2 brothers on horseback for the temple knights, isn't it? That symbol. Look after your brothers first. Right. So now, game on. The show starts now. So here we go. We've got Adam, right? We all know the story. Cain and Abel. We've got Adam. You got Cain, and then Seth replaces Abel. So, Gary, take it away. So we have this concept, which I'd never heard about before, look at your book, of 2 things. One is that Adam, and if you think about it, he lives for like 900 years or something. He's bound to teach some things, isn't he? He's come from a place of glory to landing on earth. And his sons take the knowledge and do stuff. So, Gary, over to you.
Yeah, so when we look at the secret societies, I think I'm going to have to do a lot of backward stepping to bring this into play here. So when we look at the secret societies, there's a reference in what you were talking about on the earlier slides that this is a very ancient organization. So if we look at Freemasonry today, they're basically created at the fall of the Knights Templar by the Sinclairs, or the St. Clairs, the Scotty version of the Sinclairs. And that's more of a recent organization, just as the other organizations that spun off after the fall of the Knights Templar are more recent organizations. But there's an ancient organization that goes back into prehistory that is not as sort of changing and evolving like what we saw after the fall of the Knights Templar. So Freemasonry is at the lowest level. And it's entry level for most people to bring people back into the occult. And as you mentioned, is you have in the old system 3 degrees, whether it's in the religion or it's in the secret societies. So an adept is first level at 3rd degree of the York Rite versus that being split 11 ways with the Scottish Rite, which is more of a pseudo blue blood, lower recognized organization within the bloodlines of North America that's partially based on the continental masonry that moves over to France. So it's a change thing to recognize it's not as pure as the original Royale one over in Europe, and particularly as it comes through Scotland and through London. And it's not that there aren't higher degrees. In fact, the Royal Archonate Lodge of London recognized a 4th degree. And if you're going to oversee Masonic lodges, you have to be 5th degree. But now you're starting to get into the bloodline degrees that has a different level of access to get a lot of good information on that. So it's hard to know how many that there are. It's thought that there's likely 33, as many as 33 in the old York degree. And then if you look at how they subdivide the Scottish degree to sort of get there, they actually get that close to about 360 degrees subdividing that one. So they play math with prime numbers and things like that. But if we understand that, we have to look at Freemasonry as different than Masonry. And the Masons are different than Freemasons. Masons are the Royals and the older organizations. And they track their history back to before the flood, to the development of the knowledge that was being used by Adam in Eden to run his massive agrarian society of all of the orchards. And I'm just going over quickly and how I arrive at some of the different terms, as you guys would know, is you get back to the original Hebrew and you get a better understanding of this massive place that goes from the Euphrates to the Nile River. And there are all of these orchards that are in there. There are all of these herbs and plants of the field, as in domesticated and cultivated. He's obviously running by the language in there with the cattle versus the beasts, that you have domesticated animals. And there's only Adam, and then he gets a little bit of help because another suitable helper couldn't be found, which is kind of, I won't get down that rabbit trail because I think we've been there before, but just something that sort of stands out. And so Eve is going to be created. So if you're going to run this massive garden, this enclosed garden, as you take that as an understanding, then you're going to need a lot of knowledge. So what the Gnostics and the polytheists say is that the knowledge for their society is based in the Eden knowledge, which is why they want to get back to the Eden state. But their state is the access to good and evil, and using that knowledge to set up an ethical spirit through the sciences so that they can be free of the God of the Bible. So this knowledge is going to go down to Cain, Abel, and then Seth after Adam is ostracized from Eden along with Eve. And then Cain is going to be ostracized for killing Abel. And it's Cain through his son Enoch that Enoch is going to take this knowledge and put it into the 7 disciplines that we know as the 7 liberal arts. And then he's going to wrap it into mysticism. He's actually going to create the mystical religion of the sun worshipping and bull cult of the Antediluvian epoch. And then they're going to be teaching this knowledge within the religion to the top 2 classes. So if you want to see what was going on in the first few slides, when sort of how we're controlled by certain groups and organizations and peoples, understand that top 2 class was populated by the oligarchs, the ones who have all the money. They're populated by the ones who are only educated. So they controlled the education systems. They controlled the priest and the religious systems. They controlled the government and the army, and they controlled and populated those top 2 classes. We kind of see that today. It's just, it has a little bit different form in some of the Western democracies and things. So expect that that's the model that you're going to see continue to develop, and they try and make the middle class even sort of less. But out of these mystery schools, just as out of the universities today, where you have these initiatory organizations, you have Beta House, which are, you know, sort of innocuous organizations, maybe Alpha House, whatever that name is. Once you get into the pseudo blue blood Ivy League, you start to see the nature and the reflection of that ancient history. And the most notable one would be the Skull and Bones, which would report into the Illuminati in the trunk organizations. So these are the elite of the world that's being specially educated to run the world. And so the Skull and Bones becomes the sort of platform to CEPHER, Trilateral Organization, all the international sort of organizations. So anyways, just wanted to lay that down, that ancient Masons take their history back to the mystery schools and the organizations that were set up to specially develop those sciences. And that the sciences were developed through a theology of polytheism. And in Gnosticism, the goddess of wisdom and the parent goddess for the 12 archons is Sophia. So don't be surprised that philosophy is their theology. It means the love of wisdom or the love of Sophia. So that's a theology that's guiding education and polytheism, which is why everything they do is to degrade God, to lead people away from God, and to build monuments and things to honor their belief system and their gods and their pantheon. So everything's sort of reflected in that. But these sciences were designed, especially with the introduction of the angelic knowledge, to take this to what they call the absolute. And the absolute, the philosophy of the absolute, is the supreme ideal. And it's the name of their Unitarian conception in the beginning of the universe, as you sort of dive into that. But philosophy brings all of these sciences together, harmonizes them, and gives them their trajectory. And so that's what we're starting to see happen on the same sort of scale that was before the flood. So when we look at the creation of this particular branch, it's different than the branch that was taught to Seth, who is going to continue in his lineage honoring the God of the Bible, not the pantheon. And they're going to focus more on astronomy for the most part. Not that they don't know the other sciences, because they're an agrarian society, just as Noah is still an agrarian even. And so they're going to have the knowledge, but they're going to do it in a way that doesn't pollute it. In other words, they're not going to bring in idolatry. They're not going to be sacrificing to the pantheon. It's going to have all of that rituals left out, and it's going to be the pure form. So there's a fellow in Freemasonry history that's called Dr. Oliver, and he took a lot of heat over this. And he wrote that the first schism in Freemasonry was the split between Cain and Adam. Between Cain and Seth after Adam. And so what we see is the knowledge being used in a different way as it applies to the religion and or the worship. And that's the first schism. The second part of that schism that's been in play ever since is that as you go through all of those slides, we're talking about allegories, we're talking about imagery, we're talking about a taciturn language that's communicated in these allegories and in symbols that only the adepts understand. And so that's the allegorical approach. And so everything in polytheism is interpretive. And the lower levels get a different meaning to these symbols, and only the adepts and higher get closer to the real meaning as you go up in the various degrees. So we can visualize some of that imagery that's being used, whether it's in hands or on pictures or whatever, but whatever we know is likely only based on what the lower levels know and isn't giving you the full meaning. So it's either going to be completely false or it's going to be only part of the meaning. So we want to be careful with that we don't overreach with what we're doing, but understand they use that. And we absolutely live and breathe in it through everything. And so they look at it as it's come downstream is that the original people of Judaism were wrong to look at the Torah literally or the Old Testament literally, but the Essenes and the Kabbalists coming back from Babylon were introducing that interpretive approach from polytheism, which is why Kabbalism is the mystical polytheist side, part of the secret societies and everything that's sort of related to it today. And that they looked at in the time of the new church being formed, and the one that they sort of point to as the father of this rogue way of looking at the Holy Scriptures of the Bible. His name was Jon Chrysostom, and he lived from 347 to 407 AD, and he was a literalist, applying it as most Christians would have applied the Bible right through to, not that long ago, where the interpretive approach has reasserted itself throughout Protestantism and elsewhere to interpret things and to reinvent things in terms of what the Bible means. And only as an adept would you have the correct meaning to that interpretation. So it's to keep the important information away from the mundane, the lower two classes. And so we want to be careful with that interpretive approach, because that's the polytheist approach. And so that's the other schism that has gone on. And that's why they do everything in their rituals that has all of these different meanings. They put characters and beings and locations and names in their literature, because it's all passing on information through the allegories. And again, you need to be that adept. The second schism happens after the flood, because Noah is going to carry the knowledge across the flood, but he's not going to use that in a bad way. I mean,
so Gary, let me freeze frame for a second. Well, I'll play catch up to you on the slides, okay? So I'm 2 slides away from that, if you don't mind. So on the slide, yes.
So we would, so we're just going to stay at this point in time right now, just on before the flood.
Let me play catch up.
Got it.
Yeah. So I think you've resonated quite a few things in what you said there. I'm decompressing as you're speaking, and one of the things that Dr. P's been studying, and I have as well on the British Isles and stuff, is the standing stones and the meaning of those, and the fact that when I was looking at the studies a few years ago in India, the rock carvings and things of various other places, one of the hardest things to find the lost tribes was the fact there's a lack of monuments. And so the righteous line has uncut stone, lack of monuments, whereas the righteous have built cities, the monuments, the idolatry. So you end up having to get a coinage and stuff to try and find out where people were, etc., through digs and so on. And half those coins would be Roman anyway, but you'd find some, other bits and pieces. So I think that's one of those key things. On the left, you've got cities and cut stone. On the right, you've got caves and tents and uncut stone. Now, when I say tents, I forget if it's in 1 or 2 Kings now or Chronicles, where David moves into Jerusalem and he sets his house up, and he gets Saul's servant to work to live with him, or son, etc., to work with him as lame, etc. And at that time, the rest of Yasharel will still live in tents. And if you look at Dr. P's studies and the ones I've done for Ireland as well, when they arrived in Ireland, the northern tribes sort of like 733 whatever to 724 BC. When they left, they went a lot of around London, Ireland, and the whole thing about the Sukkot or the Scotty, etc., as Dr. P's investigations have gone, is like tent dwellers. Dr. P, that's right, isn't it? Am I making that up? Is that?
Go on.
Yeah. So that whole thing there shows that right until at least 700 BC, right way back to, back to Seth, we've got tent dwellers going on, as a righteous line, where he's got cities on the left. And then we see that Solomon obviously built this huge temple, and he's, we'll go into that in a minute anyway. So let me just move forward a little bit now to the next slide, if you don't mind. Jess, the next slide, that'd be great. So I'm hoping these are the 7 that's were there. I got these off the internet, the text at the bottom here. Got them a few years ago. I hope that link's still okay. I haven't looked recently. But these are the so-called 7 sacred sciences of grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic. And if you go further down to the next slide, Jess.
Just to stop you before you move on to the next slide, where it has logic, I like that title better, but the old word is dialectics.
Oh, dialectics. Okay, cool. Thank you. I mean, I think, we take a lot of our education in England and around the West and around the world actually for granted, but we learn a lot of this through our normal education, not to the level that they would have it, obviously, but the rudimentaries of arithmetic, of English language and talk and so on, and trigonometry and this sort of stuff, we kind of learn to a level, as our normal education, which is kind of interesting, but obviously not to their level, I would suggest. And then Dr. P, okay with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm okay with this. Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting when we talk about grammar and rhetoric, because, of course, there is no understanding without those, right? And so whether you're talking about, because when you're talking about scripture is given to us in writing, right? And it's given to us in writing with a particular grammar. And unless we understand that grammar, we can't understand what's being said. Now, there is a school that existed before this that said, no, we're not going to do any writing whatsoever. And this is the point you were making, I think. When you talk about trying to find the 10 tribes, you have to find them through really oral tradition and maybe the standing stones of uncut stone, which is about really the only way you can actually really find them, because so much of it has dissolved. Their history is dissolved. And when you look at the traditions that were held in the Breton system, they were totally opposed to writing, because they said that when you put it in writing, you killed the idea. And so the writing was verboten, if you will. And as a consequence, all of that teaching was either passed from generation to generation or it didn't exist. And when they killed off the last of that teaching, well, there was nothing to pass on because there was no writing.
Yeah, and 2 things to remember on this is the first 3, grammar, rhetoric, and dialectics, are the 3 that form the basis for creating the philosophy, which is the theology. Now, one other thing that is interesting as well, as you get higher up into the adept society, their knowledge and their secrets and their true history was not written down. And you don't get a written down within those societies of that information until the Polychronicon in the Middle Ages. So they developed all of these rituals and things and stories to keep their information out there and alive, but it was an oral tradition, even though they were doing writings and all sorts of other aspects, but not things that they didn't want the mundane to have access to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. That's interesting. It's good to have time to reflect on these things, because, it's it is. If you go to the next slide, Jess, again, these are the remaining 3 then. You've got geometry, music, there's the arts, Dr. P, you got your music now, and astronomy.
Yeah, we finally got to geometry, music, and astronomy. The thing is, when it comes to, when you're talking about geometry or music, you're talking about really the same thing. That's the truth of it. Because, music is a very curious animal in respect of the laws of music exist whether a person plays a single note or not. Whether there's ever a note of music ever played, it doesn't make any difference. The laws of music are still present. They're still there. And they're geometric in nature. For instance, when you look at the frequency of F sharp in its initial, let's call it a note at 45 hertz. When you play its octave is at 90 hertz. When you play its octave, it's at 180 hertz. When you play its octave, it's at 360 hertz. When you play its octave, it's at 720 hertz. This is the note F sharp. When you look at the note C, its number is 1. Octave above it, 2, octave above it, 4, then 8, then 16, then 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, etc. This is all the geometry, if you will, of music. And people who teach music, like I've taught most of my life, and my daughter, she teaches middle school. And when she teaches music, she's fought a war against the school system for years. I mean, look, when you teach music, you teach perceptual geometry. You're teaching perceptual geometry. When you can understand the difference between a quarter note, 1, 2, 3, 4, an eighth note, 1 and 2 and 3, and a 16, 1 E and E, 2 E and E, 3 E and E, 4. You're perceptually understanding the plain arithmetic of the instrument. So this is an important part. And when you talk about astronomy and geometry and music, the astronomy is evidenced really, and this is where I don't see how you get around this, because cosmology is expressed in all of the ancient megaliths. Virtually all of them. And in fact, when you talk about the stones that were discovered by the children of Noah, and Randall mentioned this in the comments, it was actually not Cain, but Canaan, who was identified both in Luke chapter 3 and in Jubilees chapter 8 as the one who discovered the writings of the ancient watchers on a stone. And when he discovered that, they set out the oracles of the stars, the sun, and the moon. And he wrote that down, and the scripture says he sinned owing to it. But this gives you an idea that there was cosmology expressed in this ancient stone that was initially found by Canaan, the son of Shelach, right?
Yeah.
And so when we talk about this, the 7 sacred sciences, you have to keep in mind too that these sciences, like for instance, and I don't know if you're going to mention this or not, Gary, but that the name Abraxas has come up, and the name Abraxas is alleged to have been the Druid who taught Pythagoras geometry. And that's an interesting subject, because there is evidence in Ireland in particular that the Druids knew the circumference of the earth circa 1500 BC. And most of this was done by, for instance, when you look at astronomy, there's no question that astronomy factors into scripture. Who are the Magi? How did they get to Bethlehem at the birth of the child? How did that happen? I didn't add that to the New Testament. That's what's in the New Testament, talking about the Magi reading the stars and coming to where the child was being born with gifts. How'd they do that? Right. And so anyway, but let's continue on. I want to give this back to Gary.
Yeah. No, again, we don't want to be too reductive in our reasoning and thinking when we go back in history, because we're taught only Neanderthals, lived in caves, they sort of killed things, ate things, blah, blah, blah. And, we're the best we've ever been today. But in contrary, we're probably the worst we've ever been today in terms of DNA, in terms of forgetfulness, in terms of whatever. Though we're regaining knowledge now, at the end, knowledge goes to and fro, right? So we have to be really careful about how we're programmed into understanding. So if you go to the next slide, Jess, this is a very super quick slide. So this one, again, this one's more about focusing on the fallen angels, the Nephilim, the Nephilim. Again, Ezekiel 32 talks about the Nephilim being in Tartarus, right, with their shields and swords and stuff. It's kind of interesting, that. But anyway, got mingling of the sea both sides, right? So at this point, the fallen angels, it seems that I think they, clearly, right, you've got 8 people who go over the flood of Noah. So something happens in that intervening period. But we'll go into that very shortly. But on the left, there are these mantic arts. Now, these are things that I know. I'm not sure if you cover it in the book particularly. Now, Anthony Patch brought them out at some point in one of his studies, so I've put them in here. And if you go to the next slide, then these are basically, you've got Enoch 8 there with the Watchers teaching mankind, all of the things there, and it says, halfway through, and 2, it says, and the world was changed. Not this civilization was changed, the whole world was changed because of it, which implies that these fallen angels were everywhere in the world. They weren't just in Egypt, they weren't just in, sort of Sidon or somewhere else. They're everywhere, every continent, everywhere. And we're seeing evidence from that, right? And then astrology, etc. The 7 Mantic arts are all the arts that allow us to communicate with the spirit realm to obtain answers. So it's like divination, hydromancy, aeromancy, pyromancy, blah, blah, blah. All different methods. Now, the geomancy is the one, again, that Anthony Patch shows in quantum computing. So one of the key things, if you want to understand, if you go back to the 1100s, you had Raymond Lull, who created these predictive machines that would look at predicting the future and where planets might be, etc. You then move forward in time to the idea that we have this idea of combinational optimization. Now, Raymond Lull started it with chance and predicting things. These days, the best way to think of it is, if you play the game of patience with a pack of cards, you lay the cards out and you've got 52 cards, right? You lay it out and you try and get I'm going to get my 2, my 3, my 4, etc. in a line. But it's by chance that you lay them all out. But the process is called combinational optimization. And it's what quantum computers use. And that is all linked to geomancy. It's all down to chance. It's down to your first mother cards that you lay. So get your mother cards, your daughter cards, etc. It's just like playing cards with patience. If you know anything about it, it's that. And geomancy is using quantum computing. And I can give you the details for that if anybody's interested. We've done a study on it in the past. That's geomancy, and then I get aeromancy and pyromancy. So I'll come back to. But anyway, that's some of the things I've dropped. So Gary, I don't know if you cover those or not, but it's an interesting thing.
I don't get into the basic individual aspects of the divinations. I mean, it's just
yeah.
I think what I'd probably do to help sort of people out here is to get back into the track that I was on.
Sure.
And so when we look at that schism that's coming down through the polytheist version, you're going to get another intersection and a nexus where you're going to have knowledge that's going to come from the fallen angels. That's this type of knowledge that you're talking about. That's going to be in a Renaissance period.
Okay.
And as they like to call it in the occult side of the history, where they start to practice it in a reinvigorated sort of way, but probably in a more advanced kind of way, beginning with the generation of Lamech. And interestingly enough, his 4 offspring are the more important ones of Lamech's offspring are listed in the book of Genesis. These are major patriarchs of the secret societies. So Lamech is, because the 2 pillars that we had talked about that you had mentioned earlier that Noah had found or others had found, it's Hermes in the occult tradition, are the 2 pillars of Lamech or the 2 pillars of Enoch. They have 2 different versions, but basically tell the same story but it's just why I don't know why in their versions they've got one being Enoch and one being Lamech, but it doesn't really matter because this knowledge is being Renaissance and advanced by Lamech, but also Tubal-Cain, who is the greatest artificer of metals.
Yeah.
And
so
why we have, let me just finish here. And one of the reasons why you get iron going back to 3000 BC. I mean, that's right in the powerhouse and time period of that. You have Nama that's listed in there. Dr. Pigeon will like this, Jubal for music and Jubal for masonry. And so that's from the occult side. So you'd have to look at from the biblical perspective. Jubal is tents and ranching, but tents would be before they start building their cities and things that they're going to move away from that direction. Music, that's pretty much very, very similar. And so I would also connect the Cainites that take their name back to Cain from an etymological sort of basis. as these were also master craftsmen in the same spirit of Tubal Cain and Cain before the flood. Cainites are after the flood. So just as we have that sort of show up on people. And so this knowledge, and with the application of particularly geomancy, which is what we're seeing in spades in terms of the development of the sciences today, that's designed to give us godhood as they start to present that, and all those different aspects from that Davos 2018 slide that you mentioned is all working in sort of companion and together in separate technological parallels right now until they merge. But this advanced knowledge that was done actually corrupted the whole earth, as you said, and not just in one location, like in Sumer, all over the world. Hebrew word shakath. I mean, not only was all of the earth corrupted, but all the flesh was corrupted. That's how advanced this knowledge was, and that this knowledge was also used in weaponry. So when Azazel taught all of the arts of war, not just how to do martial arts, not just to make swords, but when you start to put in that angelic technology, just like we're seeing the advancement of crazy of like AI, quantum computing, and all things like that, this is planet capable destruction that I think that they're passing on, so that the end time is going to be like the days of Noah. Nothing new is under the sun. So this part of the Renaissance is a key part for us as we start to try and understand what's going on in the world today.
No, spot on, Gary. And so I didn't mean to interrupt you as such. I just wanted to get to this slide here, because this sounds to the names you were just talking through, with the righteous line and unrighteous, with the flood, the twin pillars. But I think what's also keen here is that grey area of the unrighteous line there, there's all, we don't know quite how long it was, but it's pretty much 1,000 years. It's like the original millennium reign could have been the fallen ones, right?
Yeah, it's a big period.
So 1,000 years of high IP, high intellectual property of these fallen angels. They know the wonders of the universe, right? They've come down from higher planes of existence with, they've lived for, before time possibly. so these guys, don't know how old they are, but they've at some point in their history they've known the truth. Okay, they've fallen away from the truth, but they've known the truth that we're all striving to get to overcome now ourselves, and they brought it down to earth, and they've done all the stuff, beforehand. So, it's.
Gary, can I ask you a question on this? You mentioned, you mentioned the four patriarchs. This is Lamech, Jubal, and Tubal Cain.
You've got four offspring that were listed of Lamech in the book of Genesis in the Cainite line: Tubal, Nama, Jubal, and Jubal. They are very important patriarchs, and one matriarch that's set above all the others before the flood. But I mean, you're obviously going to have Enoch and Cain in there as well, but they're in that sort of honor list of antediluvian patriarchs for the beginning of their societies.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to double check on that. I wanted to see if you were counting Lamech as those four, or a Nama.
Well, if you're doing the four, I mean, Nama is kind of the female side of it. So, I mean, if you're doing it with the four, you would use Lamech, because he would be part of that and accredited with the Renaissance. So,
okay. Yeah, very interesting. And the thing is, when you talk about these, you talk about this metallurgy, for instance, the Iron Age, it's quite interesting that we saw something kind of take place after World War II, where there was a shift over to titanium for the construction of aircraft, particularly in America. And there is reason to believe that that was a technology given at Roswell. And now we saw something that was dispositive in changing the shape of the world where we are today, which is that Russia has achieved victory over Ukraine, and it's an undisputed victory that's going to lead to the collapse of NATO and a complete restructuring of Europe. And that victory was caused by the use of this weapon called the Oreshnik. And the Oreshnik is a very interesting weapon in that it's a non-nuclear weapon. Essentially, it's a warhead filled up with concrete. But the key to the success of that weapon is that the alloy that constitutes the exterior of the shell does not burn up at 10,000 degrees when it enters the atmosphere. Even tungsten burns up at 3,500 degrees. But the Russians have developed an alloy that allows them to shoot hypersonic missiles. Everybody has the technology to achieve the hypersonic speed in terms of the fuel and the propulsion. But what we don't have is we don't have the alloy that allows the missile to function. I believe this technology was given to the Asians, and I say that Asia, generally speaking, by the same group that delineated and gave us titanium for our aircraft, the same people that gave the weapons of war in the times of Noah. That's my own personal belief. I'm not saying that it's justified by anything factual, but let's just say that the war changed when the Russians used the Oreshnik, and it had more destructive power than a nuclear weapon, and there was one speck of radiation to be found anywhere, and it was done with the use of an alloy. Now, something else that Gary mentioned, I think that, and you mentioned it too, John, is that when you look at Enoch, it's really kind of hard to tell, because remember that the book of Hanok is given to us primarily from the Ethiopian tradition. So we have the English translation out of the Ge'ez, and the Ge'ez came from some earlier translation about which we don't know. And how accurate was the Ge'ez in translating that from its original translation? This is another question. So when you read, for instance, that one of the Watchers taught the use of herbs, well, it's one thing when you say, okay, well, herbs can't be used because the Watchers taught them. Well, no, that's not the case. But when the Watchers are teaching hemlock, then you know that that's an herb you're not supposed to be near, right? And you can see the same kind of thing, that you don't see the delineation of the negativity in what the Watchers were teaching, in teaching of, for instance, teaching the circuit of the moon. Is it iniquitous to understand the circuit of the moon? Is it iniquitous to understand cosmology? I mean, these are questions. And I think when you look at Enoch, you have to be careful about writing it all off as negative knowledge, right? And because equally, I mean, we're called to look at the circuit, to look at the circuit of the moon in understanding our months out of the year. We're called to use the sun, the moon, and the stars also for signs, seasons, days, and years, right? And so, but one of the things I think the Watchers taught that is not on the table in that discussion are things like strategy and tactics, right? Strategy and tactics, which you can see being deployed in the world, the art of warfare. And so, at any rate, okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and some good points, because knowledge is neither good nor evil. It's how it's used. And so we want to be careful with that, and understand we don't have the wisdom to handle unlimited knowledge at this point in time, as we seem to demonstrate over and over and over. And what seems to be applied to the knowledge is not only the intent to do evil, to make it evil, but also the technique is provided to make that knowledge into evil that comes from the fallen angels as well. So I think there's an analogy to what you're saying about Russia and back to Nazi Germany, who had similar advancements provided to them to make some of their weapons that aren't really properly explained for a bankrupt, militaryless nation that developed these weapons and tactics out of nowhere. And I also like that metal that you talked about on that alloy is titanium. Just another example of they name everything important sort of after their gods. So
yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I think it comes together. The more you read, and I think even hearing the different voices on the show today, it's good for us to hear the different strings of an instrument come together really in a chord to really focus in and understand where we've come from, what we're dealing with today, because it's cycles of time, right? What's been before is coming again, and we're in that cycle now. It might be new to us, but it wasn't new to the fallen ones, basically. So here we go. If we go to the next slide, Jess, then this is the bit on a ask Gary a few things about, because, you know, we talk about the flood, get through the flood, the twin pillars, which are found. Noah also has his own teachings, and he teaches his family and others. We know that Abraham stayed in Noah's house for, I don't know, 43 years or something, I forget now, but it's a quite a bit of time. So he was tutored in that family from the age of 3 till 43 or something, 42, I forget now. And, you know, so got the righteous line there through Noah, Abraham, Moses, Ezra, rewriting the scriptures, and Yahushua, Jesus, obviously. In the middle, then, you got the pillars. Somehow Solomon does all sorts of stuff, and you see that he's heralded as some kind of Masonic idol, really, I guess. The temple seems to be rebuilt in part in the Rosslyn Castle in Scotland, somehow, half built, fallen down type thing with mysteries and columns and things. And so on. So Gary, why do the Masons so how do the Masons fit in with Noah? How do they fit in with the Solomon? How does that work?
So one of the things that they do is they draft all of the important patriarchs that they want into their side, or they do a conflation, as what they did with the two Enochs. But particularly after the flood, they are going to draft Adam. They are going to draft Abraham. They're going to draft King Solomon. I mean, just as some examples. And even as you get into Jesus, they are going to draft Jesus, but reinvent him as one who's, you know, sent along the way, like Confucius or Hermes, right? So they want to give a veil of cover in the West, and they also want to be able to draft people from each of the religions around the world so that they can draw them in the end time using their patriarchs and some of their scripture that they deem worthy to use. So it's important to understand that's what they do. So with Noah, and I'll come back to Solomon here in a couple of minutes. So Noah is, as we talked about, he's taken the good knowledge, the pure knowledge, and passing it on to his three sons, right? How much, we don't know, but one presumes he's not going to be passing on any of the perverted things that caused the flood. But that doesn't mean this pure line isn't going to be perverted again, just as it was by polytheism before the flood. In fact, as you get downstream, you have Abraham, who is, you know, bringing some of these perverted sciences to Egypt. Now, from a monotheist side, I'm thinking he's giving certain good knowledge, but he's not a polytheist, that's for sure, and developing that. But something happens before the disbursement of the people at Babel, and kind of the cause of what's going on at Babel. So from the secret societies, they have many writings about the time of Nimrod, and they draft Nimrod as their first grand master, who writes the first constitution for Royal Masonry after the flood.
Wow.
And so what happens is that it goes back to these two pillars. And so these two pillars are found, or one of the pillars are, because one pillar is designed to survive a destruction by fire, and one is to survive the flood. So obviously finds the one that survives the flood and floated. And it has a location to the 36,525 books that Enoch wrote down, all of this antediluvian knowledge. And again, that could be just an allegorical number, but there's a lot of information. This is the antediluvian knowledge, and we will see it in many other formats through history. It's the Pearls of Wisdom, it's the Archives of the Masons, it's the Emerald Tablet knowledge, it's the Golden Fleece, it's the Tablets of Destiny, it's the Golden Apples, it's the Hall of Records, it's the Smargadina, it is the Table of Ham, it is the Emerald Tablets and the Shatia in the mystical Judaic form. And so Hermes finds this pillar with the directions to this knowledge that's buried underneath the pyramids in their writings, and he takes his knowledge back to Nimrod, and they initiate 1,000 Masons into this new knowledge to build Babel City and Babel Tower. And with that comes the religion that converts everybody over to this Babel religion at that period of time. And so if I'm going to take a schism again, it's going to be there. I mean, you're going to have some of this knowledge provided down to Abraham, but we're not going to see a lot of this development of the knowledge through Abraham. But we are going to see the continual development of this knowledge through the various groups. And as the people will migrate, that was learned. And it's going to be through the priest class. So the Magi, they're going to be with Nimrod in Mesopotamia. You're going to have Ham and Mizraim, and they're going to take Hermes with them in the Secret Societies version to take that knowledge to Egypt. And those are going to be the two pillars. And that's what's going to export the rest of those orders and knowledge around the world. That will include the Druids that Dr. Pigeon was looking at. In fact, they look at the Druids on par with the priests of Egypt, or the philosophers of Greece, or the Brahmins of India, or the Magi. They look at them as equals. So there's a connection in the ancient world, both before and after the flood, to all of these groups, and why you're getting, the same root religion with just sort of cultural and vernacular changes to it within the language and rituals. So that's the schism after the flood. But what they're going to say is that all the way through, as the children of light in polytheism, as they like to call themselves, that they have the pure form all the way through. And so if they're going to draft people like Noah into their priesthood, then he has to be practicing by extension the other sciences other than astronomy, and doing it in the same sort of way, which makes no sense to us from a monotheist perspective, but that's one of the ways they draft it. So they look at it that the Noahite version just gets polluted as it gets amongst the knowledge gets amongst the other nations, but they have that parallel track where they're the ones providing all of this perversion to all the other nations and priesthoods. So it's a bit in contradiction as they write their history, but it's that attempt to draft Noah in. So I've already talked about how they draft Abraham in, and Solomon is thought to have the wisdom of Egypt and the wisdom of the East, and they will use biblical passages to get there. And so they draft him as the great black magician who also worshipped gods, as they'll also draft out of the Bible as in his later life, as when he marries his wives and sets up all of these statues. So they like to draft all the important aspects of people as they come down. So Jerubbaal, who builds the second temple, is going to have a significant position in the night Masonic craftsmen of architecture as they come down. And the knowledge that Solomon is receiving is coming from the king of Tyre, and that's from the Dionysian builders that comes down through Babel. And the Dionysian builders built all the great temples and palaces of the ancient world after the flood, and that's the knowledge that is being taken to Jerusalem to build Solomon's temple. And so that's when they start to draft him in with that introduction of that knowledge, right?
So the temple is just the latest iteration of all of those Babylonian sort of craftsman's ideas, really. So that's probably the latest incarnation of it. But it's interesting to see what you're saying in terms of they all almost legitimize their own standing by drafting people in,
Exactly. And they'll say that we have the true ancient records to prove it, and that the Bible is incorrect. So they need to reinvent Christianity. They need to reinvent Judaism. And they're going to break that all at the Moses level as well, that in their belief system, it's Moses who brought the religion of Egypt, not monotheism, to Israel, and that it went rogue in the time of King David. That's their story. But what it does do is it hits Islam, Judaism, and Christianity at a nexus point and turns it into its roots as being polytheism that just got perverted downstream.
What an interesting point, Gary. And I have to say, I mean, this is part of the reason, if you guys don't mind, I mean, this is part of the reason why we undertook the CEPHER, was to counter this exact movement. And because it's my opinion that there is nothing in history that is outside the reach of the scripture. Scripture talks about it. We just don't see it because we haven't read it thoroughly enough. But when we look closely at what's going on, I mean, when we talk about the schism, I think there was a schism that you can see before this too, which was the schism between the Watchers and the fallen Watchers. There was a group that was responsible, and you see the Watchers being mentioned in the book of Daniel, for instance, that were responsible to do the right thing in delivering the right message to Daniel and to be overlooking what they were responsible to do. And then there was a group of Watchers that were irresponsible, that breached their fiduciary duty, that decided to prey upon human beings. And in preying upon human beings, and even the story goes about Gadriel being the one who seduced Hua in the garden. The idea of the seduction of Hua in the garden and the change that takes place that would bring iniquity to the earth is very, very substantial. And I think when we look at all this, and again, I'll come back to this because I, of course, believe that there is a historical record that is outside the scope of Freemasonry. Freemasonry has been trying to rewrite history in its own image for a long time, but it ignores a true history. And the true history, I think, is starting to emerge because, of course, the prophecy in Daniel 12 is that knowledge would increase and people would go to and fro in the end times. And the information is most certainly increasing. Knowledge may not be, but information is. And as the information increases, we see a lot of things that are taking place now that are revealing quite an interesting record. And I agree with you, Gary, that the Masons, it's not just the Masons, but to the extent that there have been high-level Masons that have infiltrated the Catholic Church, there is a rewriting that is going on at virtually every level. And the rewriting that is going on, I think, has to do with several things. One is that you had some priorities established inside the English-speaking world in Scripture. And this was the priorities that were laid down by King James, who said, let us write the Scriptures in the vulgar tongue, in the vulgar form, in the common form. Well, this has resulted in my opinion, common or vulgar concepts concerning the Scripture without being able to delineate what's truly there and the extent of what's truly there. And so because of this common understanding of the Scripture, we miss out on so much of the particulars that are there. I mean, like, let me give you an example. We know that Abraham and his family were in the land of Ur. And in the land of Ur, they left the land of Ur to go to the land of Haran. Now, we're given a narrative today that says, the land of Ur was between the Tigris-Euphrates River, and he went to Haran, which was somewhere in the Anatolian Peninsula. Well, that may or may not be true. And I think what we're discovering now is because of some of the things we're finding about the earth, we're discovering about the earth, is really quite alarming. For instance, in my opinion, the four rivers that are given to us in the book of Genesis, when you talk about the Parath and the Hiddekel and the Gihon and the Pishon rivers, the Nile is not given to us in Scripture. The name Nile is not used. Where are these rivers? Well, we know that one was in the land of Havilah, and we know another one was encompassing Cush. The Gihon encompassed the land of Cush. Well, we've got a pretty good idea where Cush is now. And in fact, most biblical scholars will agree that the Cush initially envisioned and was translated as Ethiopia. Well, if the Gihon was running through Ethiopia, well, then that's where the Gihon was. What is the river that runs through Ethiopia? It's the Blue Nile. So when you see these kinds of things, there's big questions that arise. Now, when you have these people coming and saying, Solomon was the progenitor of the dark arts. this is part of the reason that you see the expulsion of the wisdom of Solomon, the wisdom of Sirach from Scripture. Even though we know that the 1539 Coverdale held both those books, the 1550 Bishop's Bible, the 1560 Geneva, the 1611 KJV, the 1789 Benjamin Blaney version of the KJV, even the 1867 Brown version inside of England contained the Apocrypha in the English language. But these were expelled by the agitation of who? The Scottish Rite, who had come into Parliament and demanded their expulsion. It was the Scottish Rite that had demanded the expulsion of the wisdom of Solomon and the wisdom of Sirach, as well as First and Second Esdras and, et cetera, Judith, Tobit, and so on. And so when you see this, you can see very clearly the infiltration of the Illuminati into the Scottish. In fact, Gary, I think you documented exactly who it was, the Sinclairs, who had overtaken the church, had overtaken the dominant paradigm, if you will, in Scotland in the 1500s. And they began to make fundamental changes in the Scottish church and then fundamental demands upon the English church that would result in the Westminster Confession. And a lot of this, again, is to contrive a narrative that they appreciate that may or may not be accurate. And remember that, in the factors of all of this, you cannot forget the infamous Mr. John D., right? The consultant to Elizabeth I. He cannot be left out of this equation in terms of his promulgation of sigil magic and so on and so forth. And, and even King James himself wrote a book on demonology. And, so all of these things are kind of on the table. But where in the bottom line can we find what is happening now in Scripture? Well, one question that I have, and I'll just throw it out to you guys. Are the Dead Sea Scrolls truly Dead Sea Scrolls from that era? Now, I've got two books that a friend of mine gave me by Robert Eisenman. And Eisenman looks at the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he believes the Dead Sea Scrolls were created by the group that was at Qumran under the tutelage of Yaakov Tzaddik, or James the Just. Now, if this is the case, we at least have some time dating that says, okay, these scrolls were done in the 1st century AD. Otherwise, were they a carefully done forgery that was placed in the caves by somebody later on? Were they? I mean, I want to believe, and I do believe, that the Dead Sea Scrolls have antiquity written all over them, that they predate any other text. They predate the Nag Hammadi scrolls, for instance, out of Egypt. And so these are the scrolls and I rely on these for their authenticity, to say these were authentic texts written at that time. There's discrepancies in them. There's 3 different forms of Isaiah, for instance. They don't agree with each other in every verse. And we see, there were 5 different copies of the Book of Enoch, 6 different copies of the Book of Jubilees, right? So all of these things being found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they give us some indication that the word is being delivered to us, saved up for us, if you will, and reserved to be given to us at this time now, that we might have the tools in our box to be able to refute this constant diatribe that's going to come from Freemasonry. And in particular, the Scottish Rite Freemason. Remember, Albert Pike said it clearly that he intends to show at the end of the Third World War that Lucifer is the true guiding light. That was what's in his letter of 1868 or whatever year it was. But this is, and do not think that is not at the source of Masonry. And so what do we see? Do we have tools in our arsenal that will allow us to defeat this narrative? Do we have language that will give us an understanding of what took place in the antediluvian world outside of the polytheistic discussions? Do we have that language? I think we do. When you talk about Abraham bringing things into Egypt, Gary, I think Abraham did bring things into Egypt. And in Genesis 13, it says Abraham left Mitzrayim and went south into the land of Canaan. This is also a very interesting discussion. So where was the land of Ur? Where was the land of Haran? And I remind you, when I looked at the land of Ur, we have something very interesting in that discussion, looking at the Hebrew. Because when you read Daniel, Daniel talks about the Watchers. Now, there's only one other book that has any reference to the Watchers, and that's the book of Job, at least in the 66 book version of Scripture. And so in Daniel, the difficulty with Daniel is that Daniel was crafted in Aramaic, not in Hebrew. So when you look at Daniel, what is the word for watcher? Well, it's ear. And when you look at it in terms of what it is in Job, it's ire. And the ire is spelled the same way as the word light. But ear is spelled the same way as the land of Ur. Remember that light is called Or, right? Aleph Vav Resh, Or, right? Well, where is the land of Ur? Is it the land of light? Is this Ur? So when you're talking about Urim, you're talking about, what is this land of Ur from which Abraham left, and where is it exactly? And now we know also that when we talk about the geography of the earth, I'm not certain on any of this geography anymore. I'm not certain about any of it. I'm not certain that the North Pole was where it is now during that time at all. And that where are the rivers in Africa? Where is the true situs of Solomon's temple? Where is the true situs of Yahud and the northern kingdom? Where was the true situs of the Pelishtim Empire? Where was Mitzrayim? Where was Assyria? Where was Babylon? Right? Babylon, it was a Tower of Babel and a city built of brick, right? Built of brick. Because I'm going to ask you something. When you read the Exodus narrative in Shemot, Exodus, they left the land of Egypt and then embarked on a journey in the wilderness for 40 years. Are you trying to tell me that they left the land of Egypt and there's not one word about the pyramids in Shemot? Not one word. So what are we to believe? That the pyramids were built after the Exodus? No archaeologists agree with that. They all say they're antediluvian, at best. So what do we know?
Well, the word's true, Dr. P. We've got the Rakiners, and at the end of the day, when we've got a massive lies from the Masons, whoever is in control of this world, which is we know isn't, it's the first slide says it, right? The only thing we can stand on is the word, and we have to have truth in that. In terms of, you're right, the geographies, we have no idea. It could be upside down. We could be anywhere. We've looked at Edinburgh being a situs for Jerusalem. Looked at places in Africa, etc. But we know the two witnesses will have to arrive at a place that's civilized and has people. They're not going to. So it has to be a city that's either rejuvenated or is existing. Otherwise, they couldn't do what they want to do, right? They wouldn't be on TV and everything else, right? So wherever it is, has to be a civilization, whether it be in Africa, whether it be here, whether it be in the Levant or wherever it happens to be. But you're right, things have changed, and we know things are changing again now. We can see the globe's changing, and that the whole ecosystem around the poles and where the ocean's now moving up, okay, isn't it? So we now know that we have a global change, a planetary change that's happening somehow. We don't know what to do with it, but there's something like 150-mile sort of high wave in the middle of the Earth at the equator that's moving upwards. So, you have to imagine, is that the first time in the Earth's history that's happened? I'm assuming not, right? So we don't know. But you raise very good points. And I think at the end of the day, when I'm stuck in a cave on a mountain somewhere, hopefully, and all I've got is a book, I go to Isaiah, I go to Daniel or whatever else, and just sit in the Word and think, right, okay, the angels around me will protect me. I won't go hungry, etc. And that's what we're going to fall down on. But we are called to study. In Timothy, it says, prove yourself worthy by studying, and we are, and that's what we're doing on the show here now. And we need to question. Sorry,
we need to question, but we should also be sort of Berean-like. And so I think we can rely on the word. I think we have to try and understand it with other data points within the Bible, and that if we're getting a little bit confused on the geography, I think I don't see that confusion there. If I look at You know, the Gihon River, for example, that's sort of defined as being in Ethiopia. Biblically, we understand Upper and Lower Egypt as being where Mizraim and Cush are, and Cush being in Upper Egypt. And so that's the Nile River that flows in there versus where we look at Ethiopia as a country today. And before the flood, and even shortly after the flood, even as far as the west coast of Africa was known as Antiops or Ethiopia. So that name sort of moved. So I go to the biblical references to get sort of my understanding on that. And when you look at the land of Egypt, at times, and particularly in the time of Abraham, Egypt ruled much of the covenant land in the north area and the south. So depending on the time frame that you're using that reference, what was the size of the land of Egypt? It's also one of the main terms understanding some of the data points in terms of timing with Abraham and the building of the temple and the Exodus and things like that. You need to sort of understand that, and things start to come, quite, for me, they become clear. So I do rely on the Bible. I do rely on verifying it through the Greek and the Hebrew, but I don't think that that's been necessarily tampered with. When we talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, a very important source of information, and we get some all sorts of different things, including some versions of the Old Testament coming out of there. But we also get a lot of Gnostic Gospels out of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So you have to understand that Essenic movement was around the Qumran community. Not only were they Judaic, but they were polytheist. And much of the symbolism and the handshakes and some of the organizational structure formed secret societies even to this day that the modern organizations were taking out of the Essenes. And so I think, when we look at the information that's out there, we should look at it in a very critical way. But we should also rely on the Bible to be the measuring stick. And if we take away the standard of the Bible because of this or that may or may not sort of stand with what other people would look at things, I think when we start to get that interpretive approach in there, we have nothing to be able to measure properly from what we see in the world to what we were provided. So I think we need to rely on how the Bible is written and just have faith in it.
Yeah. So I think, I believe it's all been given and handed out as by inspiration of the Ruach, obviously. And I believe that our Father wouldn't give us anything that's unwholesome or right for this period of time. But this period of time is a change of growing knowledge. It's a time of reinvigoration, I think, for the deeper meanings of the word, rather than being turning up for duty's sake. Like, a lot of my relatives going back through the past few hundred years, no doubt, will have attended church as a duty. I've had members of our family that have actually been preachers, etc. But I think mainly turning up and not having the written word to study themselves, perhaps owning books would be a privilege in those days, and not having the sources now of having world-renowned people on the show, for instance, like yourselves, that are able to articulate and bring points to bear to study in the light together. So now we're in a privileged time, and I think we have to weigh it all up. Ultimately, as I say, when I'm in the cave, I've got one book and the rack, and that's it. But in the meantime, we should challenge every path. Jess, go to the next slide, please. This is the final slide. We've got through 34 now, which is not bad going for a show. I just want to run through quickly. This is the righteous line. We've done the unrighteous line with the Mantic arts. This is the righteous line in terms of, the steps, like the Mazzaroth with the constellations or the stars. It was given to Seth, and that was written by Polymus in Palestine, and has also been A Witness in the Stars as more recent books in the 1850s, etc. So that tells the full story of the fall, the Redeemer, the dragon underfoot, and the redeemed, and final judgment in the stars. Okay. 2, we got the law given from Enoch, in Joshua 3:26, Enoch was there teaching the people of the earth. Okay, the word, the law, wisdom, and knowledge. He says. 3, you got the law given from Noah. So in Jubilee 7:20, Noah was teaching his obviously his children and locals that. There's a book there, Gary. I don't know if you've come across it. I was lucky enough to pick it up probably about 18 months, maybe 2 years ago. Wing Commander P.J. Wiseman was one of the British commanders out there in Babylon in 1936, and he was overseeing the digs over there. And he wrote this book called New Discoveries in Babylon about Genesis. Now, it's kind of a cool old book. It was written a long time ago, and they found various monolithic stones and tablets of stones around Nivernais, around Babylon, with the Ten Commandments on. And they dated it because they dug right the way down to the flood layer strata, which is, it's either clay or shingle, I forget which now, and they could dig through it to see, so they could date it quite clearly. And they dated this to about 2000 BC to 2300 BC. Whatever, it's just above that layer anyway. They found these tablets. So at that time, it shows that there's been one law, one knowledge passed down, is what I'm saying. Moses wasn't the first one to have this. It's been since time immemorial, right? Since Adam, the Ten Commandments, or the study of them.
It would be part of the covenants being built through the Antediluvian epoch that get passed on to Noah, passed on to Abraham. So yeah, you would expect the laws to be the same. And because they're in Egypt for so long, and Moses is raised as a polytheist, I mean, God has to provide everything back, including the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, so there's one truth, right? Not many truths, there's one truth. And then obviously got Mount Sinai, the Ten Commandments, and they got Ezra rescribing everything for Ezra. Okay, so that's the righteous line. I might have missed things out, but it gives, just again, I wanted to be complete with the chronology.
Yeah, so. I wanted to say one other thing about how we get to the KJV Bible. And again, I look at the KJV translation. I'm fine with it. I got a lot of things that I might disagree with it, but we have the Greek and we have the Hebrew. But we need to understand, though, that King James, he calls themselves the Mighty Prince James, which is a very interesting term when you take that back to Hebrew. But he's a royale, and he comes out of Scotland, and he comes out of that whole mix that we were talking about with the St. Clairs and the starting up of Rosicrucianism in 1323 and 1317 of Freemasonry. And so what's interesting to know is that, Prince King James is seen in some imagery as being initiated into Freemasonry, and that's just propaganda. Because I'm not saying he wasn't a Mason, because he was. He's a royale. He was initiated from childhood. And so he was way above adept. But in that system, the purebloods aren't allowed to take an adult title, take the adept title till sometime between 25 and 30 years old. And so they would be educated beyond third degree. We don't know how high those degrees go. But we do know it goes above 7, which is generally thought to be the Rosicrucian level on that Thelemic tree trunk order, and the royales are higher than that. So some people say it goes up to as high as 33 on the old York system. I don't have any data points to prove that, but what I do know is he's a royale, and they are taught from childhood. And so when he looks at what he's doing with the KJV, I think God is using him. I think he's using that for his own politics as well, to unite the empire, to try and unite the religion as he comes over from Scotland to England after Elizabeth. And also understand Bacon, as what was talked about earlier, was mentored by John Dee. And Bacon was the most important individual for both Elizabeth and for King James. And he becomes the one who's developing the KJV language that's going to be utilized in the King James Version Bible, and thought to be, at least according to occult belief system, he's the last editor of the KJV Bible. So some of the interesting sort of mistranslations are probably designed to favor the mighty Prince James, like the unicorn translation, for example, because he's the coming out of the unicorn dynasty. So one expects that that's why some of those words were put in there. So when we want to understand the secret societies, what we see is what they want us to see. So we see the three lower levels of the Rosicrucians, the Illuminati, and Freemasonry. What we don't see is what's above that in that trunk is in significant ways, but we see their organizations as their branch organizations. So above those three, you have the Committee of 300 Families. And from that picture that was up there, it didn't include the Council of 33 Families, and it didn't, but it did include the 13 families. But that's just the Western organizations. I did a show last night, and I was asked, "Is there a secret society organization that you'd like to mention that most people might not be aware of?" And I came up with the Wutsu Society. And people said the Wutsu Society. I said, yeah, this is very important for an understanding of the world we live in, is that Wutsu means the 5 ancestors, the 5 emperors, and including the Yellow Emperor. These are the offspring of the dragon creator gods after the flood, who create the royal bloodline, the Shah dynasty, that create this organization that is on equal as the Eastern organization to the Western organization of the European Masonry, that's of the Royals. And so when we look at secret societies, there's secret societies throughout the world. It's part of the polytheist religion. So if you look at the organizational structure that is partly going to be formed from the Essenes and the other part from the Assassins for the Templar organization, that's going to be the organizational structure that's brought back to Europe for all of the Western societies, we start to see some commonality amongst that polytheism that makes sense of the Western bloodlines recognizing branches of those Eastern secret societies as equals, because it goes back to the time of the flood, the time of Babel, and also from before the flood. And we need to understand that, and that these degrees are way higher than the 4th level of the York Rite that the London Lodge recognizes. And again, we don't know how many. I don't believe it actually gets up to 33, but I don't know. The most I've been told is somewhere between 9 and 11, but there could be more. But that is for the absolute purebloods of the Royals, and they control all of these secret societies, and they've controlled our society all the way through our history. And they're reasserting themselves again today.
Wow. Yeah. Good word to ponder on. So,
Stephen, did you want to say something, Stephen, before I conclude?
Yeah, I just want to say that's very interesting what Gary is saying about a dragon history in the past for the Chinese nobility, because I have seen this also in the generational lines among the Japanese. They point back to an extraterrestrial progenitor, if you will, and which appears to be another phrase for a watcher. And so as a consequence, you have, and that's a post-Diluvian concept, that you have this dragon progenitor of the line of nobility inside of that society. A very interesting equation. And it's a very interesting point, right? And so do we have a blended DNA even at this point among all the nobility? And so when we start to begin to talk about, who are these levels above the Masons? Of course, when you can enter Masonry and go up the ladder, you're not going to get to these entrenched Committee of 300 or the 33 families or the 13. You're not going to get there. You're not going to do that in your lifetime. You're not going to move into that level of the hierarchy. And, ultimately with all that hierarchy, the beauty of the belief in Mashiach is the beauty that we move from being in the flesh here to being in eternity there. And we move into eternity there in the blood of the Lamb and the redemption and the ascension of Yahushua. And that's the end of the story. And so all of this mechanism on earth with the secret societies, the manipulation of history, we're in control, we're in power. You remember Alexander Haig, when Reagan got shot, Alexander Haig came out and said, I'm in control now, right? It's very quick to assert that from the White House. I'm in control now. Well, he was in control for about 15 minutes before he wasn't in control thereafter. But there's lots of people who think I'm in control now, and most of them are in the grave now, So the true one in control is really Yah, and his blessing upon us is the doorway into the kingdom, and the doorway into the kingdom was given to us. We should never forget about that. And it doesn't have to be, there's nothing secret about it. It's open. It's an open confession of faith. It's an open stand. We're open as to who we are. We're openly saying Mashiach is our Redeemer. It is Yahushua, who comes in the name of the Father, that has opened the door to us to the heavenly throne. So why are we, there's nothing else really for us to worry about. In terms of the machinations on earth, yeah, we can see these secret societies. They're rising up to a culmination of events now. They're rising up to a culmination because their time is short. And so all of their mechanism now is going to be exposed for us to see. And in all of that, a couple of things I just want to close with. I don't think Scripture is silent as to any of the things we see coming upon the earth. If we look deep enough, we'll find it in the Scripture telling us what has happened, what is going to happen, and how Yah has. None of this is a shock to Yah at all. None of this. And that all of this machination and all of these convulsions that are on the earth are ultimately going to reach a conclusion that has been preordained by Yah anyway. And in the middle of that, in the middle of this trial, comes the remnant who is going to be, purged. The dross will be purged, and the silver will show itself, and the gold will show itself. And that's where it is. And so let not your heart be troubled as to any of these things. Remember that Mashiach loves you. He's loved you from the beginning of time. He carries you in the palm of his hand. No one will snatch you from the palm of his hand. That's the way it is. And that's the way it's going to be. And may Yah be praised. Baruch atah Yahweh Sevaot El Kadosh Hakad Yasharel Elohai Yasharel Abinu Ma'olam Vad Olam. Blessed is Yahweh, the Elohai of Yasharel, our Father forever and ever. Hallelujah. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Hallelujah. Oh, wonderful, Stephen. You've actually concluded for me. That's wonderful. And you prayed at the end too. So I want to thank you all for joining us today in this discussion. Gary, Stephen, for bringing your contributions here. And also, John, I know how much you slaved over this to do this when you're working such a big job on the marketplace, and to invest and do this. And the slides are always very, very thorough. So I do appreciate that, Stacey, and I appreciate that and what you bring and how you allow this discussion to flow for our community here as well. So, I want to thank you. I'm sorry, it seems like the problems were only on my side, but I couldn't tell that. And I want to release you now. Stephen did a wonderful conclusion, and it's just great because there is a story. Those books are there for a purpose with the Scripture, and they show us where we are going, where we are. The context of today was about history then, history now, and where we are going to the future. And the one thing that came out through this conversation today, through this study, that we can clearly see is that there is a visible hierarchy. And when we accept that, then we begin to understand about this fallen angel agenda and every other agenda, and where it points to the extraordinary powers, the knowledge throughout the history that we've been talking about, studying about where we are now with those in power. And it gives us a foundation. It shows us Hasatan is the God of this world, but not for long. Yah uses these things. He allows it. They are pawns in his hands, but he won't have that power forever. So, that's an explanation from a layman term, but such a great discussion here today. And I just want to thank you, everyone on the panel here again. Stacey, did you have anything to conclude before we leave?
No, I just agree with Dr. P. As long as we have the name, that's all that matters. We know the end of the story. Once he died on the cross, Yeshua died on the cross for us. He took the keys back from death, hell, and the grave that Adam gave up, and we know who wins. So stand firm.
Amen. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, stand firm and stand strong. And with that, we bless you and we say goodbye. Look out on the Eating While Honey platforms for information about Pesach in Portugal, Pesach, Florida. Please also the Telegram groups, they will be released so that you can meet in your Telegram communities if you can't get together in person as well. That is all taking place. Please look throughout the Telegram community for that as well. And with that, we leave you and love you. Take care. God bless everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Two people laughed. Two people cried. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Ever seen a blind man cross the road, trying to make the other side, baby? Ever seen a young girl growing old, trying to make herself a bride? So what becomes of you, my love?
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Pray that he's still out there.